Each year we're very fortunate to be joined by the MLB data team to share the latest Statcast updates. So joining us today with presentations about bat tracking and weather data are Jason Bernard, Senior Manager, Baseball Research and Development, Graham Goldbeck, Product Manager, Baseball Data Platform, Clay Nunnally, Baseball Scientist, Mike Petriello, Stats Analyst, and David Adler, Statcast Researcher. Take it away.
Hello, everybody. Thank you. We are the Baseball Savant team. We are a part of it. We're actually going to split our hour-long presentation into two parts. We're going to do a bit about Baseball Savant. And then for the second half, we're going to have the rest of our team come and talk about cool weather data. So a little bit about us. This is what the Baseball Savant team looks like right now. Obviously, this is just the tip of the iceberg because any cool work we do is, built on a lot of people like Rob Engel and Clay and Graham and a lot of names you know and a lot of names you don't know. So David and Jason and I are going to do two things today. First, we're going to tell you, remind you a little bit about what we have added to the site last year and what we're going to continue to add this year, and then get into bat tracking data, which is like our big cool new thing that I think everyone's excited about. What we do is, if you're not familiar with our work, we take all the Statcast data and we try to make it presentable, right? We try to get it out so broadcasters can use it, writers can access it and research it. And for that reason, we've got lots of cool baseball GIFs and 0 p-values in this. So it's going to be very different from all the research presentations, I can promise you. Jason is going to start with a quick recap of what we added last year, because what we've learned is there's so much cool stuff that people don't know about all of it. I definitely heard a presentation yesterday saying, it would be cool. And we're in the back going, we have that. Just go look at the site. So maybe that's on us. And then David will tell you about some of the other stuff we want to add this upcoming year.
All right. So like Mike said, we're going to bring back some of the past for some of you that were here last year. This might look a little familiar. So last year I'm not going to say promised, but we were in the process of debuting minor league game feed as WBC started. So we have that available for every level, and Statcast data shows for AAA, and there are notifications if a park has Statcast data available or not. There's also the position player arm strength leaderboard got added to the outfield arm strength, and we also have pitch tempo, which is not to be confused with the pitch timer. We repeat one more time. We also have 2 stolen base prevention data leaderboards, one from the pitcher perspective and one from the catcher perspective. Both look at stolen base attempts of second base, and each stolen base attempt has a probability of whether the steal will be successful or not, and they are aggregated to the specific catcher or pitcher. These ones are more quality of life updates that we've done in the last year. The first one is we've made it a little clearer of pitch type groupings. Before, you used to be able to just click the grouping and they would just click all together. This view is a little more clear to understand what is going on and which pitches are assigned to the groups that the way we classify them. The other is one of my favorite pet projects that we've done is we call them sliders, but they're percentile rankings and how we display them. So on the left is the way we used to do them. On the right, hopefully, is the way everyone likes them now, because they're going to be like that for a while.
All right, so patriotic lollipops.
Lollipops is good. Lollipops is good. After that, another thing that we've shown is a base running leaderboard, which I'm drawing a blank on what that one is.
Well, it's about base running value. It's not about stolen bases. It's about knowing the position of the runner and all that. So who's gaining the most based on the probabilities of each play.
It's about who's taking the extra base more often and who stops that the best.
And then we also have a timer infraction leaderboard that shows, timer infractions. We know the new rules were a hot topic, so we made sure that this was one that we had up there, so everyone had at least some transparency in what's going on.
Yeah. Before David takes us into what's next, I meant to mention this before. If you go to MLB.com in the career section, the summer internship for Statcast has been posted. Jason was one of our first interns, and he's turned it into a career. And he's going to be the one who's going through and doing a lot of the evaluation. So definitely come introduce yourself to him afterwards if that's a path you're interested in taking. One more thing I forgot.
There's just a few more.
Yep.
Two more, actually. Last year when we were here, we previewed our expected home run metric, which we now have a full leaderboard for available, and you can see per play where a home run would be, where a home run or a fly ball 300 feet or more would be a home run in a specific park. And we also, more plugging, thanks, Mike, to a home run report, which is our Twitter account that shows those fancy graphics that populate every home run and shows pretty much the same thing you see on Savant, but in a timely fashion. And then the last thing that we've done over the last year is arguably one of the more important ones that we've done, which is fielding run value, which is our more unified way of being able to compare all fielding groups into one cohesive ranking. So the top of the leaderboard right there is Brennan Doyle, and then right after him is Patrick Bailey. And one of the more difficult things historically has been finding a way to compare fielders to other fielders, and this is our way of doing that.
Yeah, one of the things we've been focusing on this year is like kind of consolidating a lot of these different metrics into kind of overall stats. So like if you look at the new percentile rankings, you'll see the player value section at the top that has, batting value, base running value, fielding value, and then with this fielding run value. Yeah, this is what made that possible because we were able to put all of our defensive metrics together into one.
Brian, yesterday you asked about the differences between OIA and DRS, and you got a very good answer, right? Which is that they're measuring different things. This is everything else that comes with OIA placed onto a run scale, right?
Go by that.
Outs above average if you just want batted balls turned into outs,
Yeah.
but that's not for catchers. It's not for framing. So like one frame is not one block, is not one ball caught. You can see in the green box there, if you're really interested in the scale, right? It puts it onto an even scale. So that, for example, you see on the leaderboard here, there are catchers, right? There are shortstops, there are center fielders. Much more to come on this as well.
Like outs above average is mainly about range, but now we have the arm strength also that we can, wrap into the
Exactly right.
right stat.
Let's talk about some new stuff before we get into bat tracking. It's not just bat tracking this year. There's some other cool things that we've got in the pipe work, and David's going to tell you about that.
Yeah. So one of the big things we've been working on that will be ready soon is a minor league Statcast search page. So basically we're replicating the major league Statcast search page that you see on Savant, so that you'll be able to search for really all the same big metrics and types of things that you can get for a major leaguer, but for minor leaguers. Also, you'll be able to do new things like search by level, by MLB organization, by specific minor league team, by the minor league ballpark, all that type of stuff that's specific to the minors. The data set that we have available is not like complete back to 2015 like StatCast, regular Major League Statcast data is, but we'll have AAA data starting with 2023. Also some Pacific Coast League data for 2022. And Charlotte home games also, and then some Florida State League single A data starting from 2021. So just based on when the tracking has become available for the different levels. But I mean, it's basically, it has everything available that the Major League Statcast search page does, and you'll be able to see different things like a player's pitch type by each level, like you see in McAble there. You'll be able to see which organizations are throwing sliders that break a lot. So if an organization is teaching a certain skill among their players, hopefully you'll be able to dig that up in the search. All sorts of different things, just the hardest or softest hit balls by any minor leaguer for a given season. So
I regret to inform you the bottom of the AAA hard hit rate is still Billy Hamilton, believe it or not. I was so happy when the Yankees had the biggest break. One more thing to follow up on this is, if you were following this data in real time last year, you might have thought the pitch classifications were a little bit iffy. That's because a lot of those guys were brand new, but a lot of work has been put into cleaning that up last year and going forward. So we're pretty excited about that.
yeah, and you'll also be able to kind of search through the minor league player database by player.
Exactly.
There's a lot of players that are only in the minors that you wouldn't be able to see on the Major League Statcast search. Another thing that's coming is some more seam shifted wake data. So starting from a couple of years ago, you could kind of get at who is having a seam shifted wake effect by looking at our spin direction leaderboard, which is like has the visuals that look like a clock. You can see the spin direction, the movement out of the pitcher's hand and then compare that to the observed movement based on where the ball is at the plate. But we don't have an actual kind of seam shifted wake classification for different pitchers, different pitches. So what we're working on adding is just the percentage of a specific pitcher's pitches that are experiencing seam shifted wake effect. So we can, basically the pitches that get classified as seam shifted wake are ones that have 3 or more inches of movement due to seam shifted wake side force. Initially, we're focusing on sinkers and changeups, the pitches that would experience that seam shifted wake side force. But you'll be able to see which pitchers really benefited from seam shifted wake. Yennier Cano being our prime example here. His changeup, you can see like just by the numbers comparison that when he gets a seam shifted wake effect, sorry, on a sinker, his run value is much better. He gets lower launch angles. Just his stats against him are much worse for the hitter. So
I'm so sorry to my man Vinny that we had to watch him look a fool about 20 times there. But yeah, the clock is cool, but it's just not digestible very well.
Yeah.
So if you want to be able to tell stories, we know guys are trying to do this now. There'll be leaderboards too, who's doing it the most, the least.
Yeah, we don't want you to have to, figure out just by looking at the clocks who might be throwing pitches with seam shifted wake. We want you to be able to just see that this guy throws 58% of his sinkers with a seam shifted wake effect.
Before we do
Yes.
this,
So we don't have a visual ready to go for this for a leaderboard, but another thing that we're working on adding to Baseball Savant is induced vertical break. You can currently search for that in the Statcast search, but we want to get it into more places that are easily visible, like the game feed and on the player pages. So, when we initially put out our pitch movement leaderboard years ago, it was a lot, cleaner and simpler to just say, well, this is the measured, vertical movement of the pitch. This is how much it dropped. So we don't have to kind of explain to people when it wasn't so familiar at the time that, a pitch is rising or falling relative to a theoretical spinless pitch that's coming in. But now IVB is a lot more widespread, especially among the players. If you go into any clubhouse and talk to the pitchers, all they will talk about is their IVB. They'll talk about like where their pitches are relative to the 0 line. They'll talk about, that's what they're referencing. That's what they're thinking about. That's how they're, developing and designing their pitches. So we wanted to make IVB more visible on Baseball Savant now. And that's why we want to get it into the game feed. So you can see that along with the regular horizontal and vertical movement that we already show there. Same thing on the player pages. It's currently searchable, so you can already find it if you're looking for it, but we don't want you to have to look for it so hard.
Thank you. All right, let's talk about bat tracking. This is the big cool thing that we're doing this year. This is the thing everybody's interested in. Obviously, a lot of people we work with have put a lot of effort into this, many people in this room. So the history of this is in 2022, it was installed as a test just in Houston at Dodger Stadium, just to see if it would work, and it basically did. Last year, it was in all 30 parks. And I think our hope was originally that would be like the first year of data we'd put out. It's going to end up being treated as a test year, and 2024 will be the first production year of data. So the data I'm going to show you is partial season 2023 data. That is not going to be up on a leaderboard anywhere. It's just kind of used for testing and modeling. But what's nice about this kind of stuff is that it's meaningful real fast in like a game or two. So even though I don't have full season data to show you, you're going to like the names. They're going to make sense. So let's talk about a couple of things. How does it work, right? You've probably seen a visual like this before. The reason that this is trackable now when it wasn't before is you've got these extra very, very high frame rate cameras, because if you think about how fast a swing is, any kind of regular camera is just going to see it as a blur, right? So you can see the mosaic over there, which I'm sure I stole from Graham at some point. It shows you exactly how the bat is being tracked. Issue we've had, not issue necessarily, but a question is, how do we appropriately present this kind of stuff, right? What's the baseline here is, well, who swings fast and slow, right? Average swing speed. What's different from average pitch speed, right? I'll find a guy's fastballs and I'll tell you his average fastball velocity, but I would never put all of his pitches together and just tell you his average pitch velocity. That wouldn't make sense, right? It's the same thing with throwing. We don't want to average all the lobs that nobody cares about. So put a lot of work into trying to figure out what to do. The average swing speed is going to be presented not as the average of everything, but as the average of the top 90% of a hitter's swings, which I think makes sense. Bottom stuff, check swings or swords, as we'll get to. It doesn't really tell you that much about anything. So now we know the average is about 71, 72 miles an hour. You can see the range there. You could probably guess the names at the top and bottom of this graphic. I'll show you them in a minute, but they will be exactly who you think they are, which is pretty fun. And here they are. So here's what I love about this red list. 8 guys who are like absolute tanks, right? Stanton, yes. Shohei, perfect. And then I always like when there's a guy you learn something about. I think Kenny, I told you yesterday, Matt Wallner was going to be on this list. Matt Wallner, I'm like way more interested now in Matt Wallner. And I'll definitely remember the time last summer when we were first looking into this, and Tom Tango, who obviously does most of our data science work on this, hits me up and he's like, hey, do you know Junior Caminero? And I'm like, yeah, I know him. He's like, I don't know him, but he pops up really well on this list. Does this make sense to you? I'm like, this is tremendous. This is wonderful. The guys in the bottom, I think, make sense. Now, I don't want to say criticism, but one thing about Statcast and Baseball Savant people love to say is that we hate Luis Arraez and that we think he's a bad player and he's not valuable. And it's obviously not true, but this is a fact. He just doesn't swing that hard. We have another metric I'll show you in a minute that's going to make him look great. But for the most part, I think this extremely matches the eye test, right? You've got guys who are swinging hard, you've got guys who don't. Maybe that's because they can't. Maybe that's because that's their strategy. That's hard to say for everybody. But I think this is satisfying. It's exactly what you want. All right, so how do we display this in other ways? A hard swing, so we've got, a hard hit ball is over 95 miles an hour of exit velocity. A hard swing will be at 75. Why 75? Because if you look at run value on a per swing basis, it's below average till you get up to 75, and that's about the average line. Anything above that is above average up until a point. There's a point where you swing too hard and you start to miss a lot more. But what I really like, I've got a couple of these kind of contextual, binary is hard and is not hard for some other metrics. And it tells you right away, do you want to swing hard? Yes, that is a very good and valuable thing to do. Intuitively, that makes sense. And when I looked at it on a per team basis, I was so happy to see the Braves ahead of everybody by a mile. Is that because they select guys who swing hard, or they just tell everybody to swing hard? I don't actually know the answer to that. I regret to tell anybody who likes Washington and Cleveland, they are at the bottom of like every single one of these I'm going to show, but eye test matched, right? So we're also going to have one about squared up. All right. So this gets a little complicated, but I think for this audience, it'll work out perfectly. We're going to have a squared up metric, which I'll show you a leaderboard for in a second. It's really going to be about the potential energy that comes out of a swing, right? It's not going to be specifically about where did you impact it, but it's going to be about, you take the swing speed and to a lesser extent the pitch speed, but a little bit, and you throw it into the big physics blender that Tom has done, and you know what the maximum exit velocity can possibly be, right? So to get to the maximum exit velocity, by definition, you have to have hit the ball in the barrel of the bat. You just can't do it off the hands. Like observed and physics say the same thing. So when we show on a per swing basis, it can be from 0% squared up to 100% squared up. So if I were to say 90% squared up, that means he attained, based on his swing speed and the pitch speed, 90% of the possible exit velocity, which almost certainly tells you about where it hit on the bat. And in my research the other day, if you don't get to 90% squared up, it's not a ball worth making contact for the most part. It's all below average run values unless you get to 90%. Then it goes straight up from there. So, like I said, we don't hate Luis Arraez. You know what Luis Arraez is really good at? Squaring up the baseball. This is not exactly the inverse of the other list, but to some extent it is. I have a different one that I didn't show here. So this is squared up per swing. A lot of these guys are, quad A types or big swing and miss dudes. I don't think I have it here handy to show, but in our test data, the regular player who had the weakest squared up per contact rate was actually Pete Alonso, which I found really interesting. He's got huge power, but doesn't always get to it, which holds him back a little bit. Again, hey, why does this matter? The numbers are massive. It's like 500 points of slugging. So I think that's cool. One other version of this we're going to have, which I don't have a slide for here. There's not there's not like a swing speed minimum to square up the ball, right? You just got to get to whatever exit velocity is available based on your swing speed. But what's more valuable is squaring up the ball and swinging harder. So we're going to do that. It's going to be like the barrels of this, basically, combinations. The numbers for doing that, I think we're going to call them blasts, are monumental, right? Ronald Acuna Jr. is tremendous at this. That is going to be a really, I think, valuable tool to see who makes the best contact, the most efficient contact, while also swinging the hell out of the bat. So that's the entire point if you're a power hitter. You can do this from the pitcher's point of view too. Like I said, we don't have years and years of data, so I can't tell you how replicable this is going to be from year to year. I don't want to pick on Zach Greinke and Adam Wainwright. I like them both very much, but at probably the end of their careers last year, they did not miss a lot of bats. They gave up a lot of loud contact. The guys on the other side are very interesting. Tanner Scott had a great year. Bautista before he got hurt. Abreu. And now you know something more about Robert Suarez than you did yesterday. All right, this one's cool. I like this a lot. As I promised Tracy, there'd be a lot to gifts on this and not a lot of p-values. Just like watch these swings. Did I cherry pick a rise in Javier Baez? Yes, I did. But short swing on the left and a big looping swing on the right. And we thought that was interesting. So can we quantify that? Can we show who's got a long swing, who's got a short swing? Is there overlap with bat speed? Yes, but not a perfect one. So the difference between these two swings, 4.3 feet and almost 9 feet, which I think matches the eye test a lot. Clay's probably noticing I copy and pasted his definition and put it on the bottom here. But you can kind of see the one on the right for Baez. It takes so much longer for him to loop around and get to that contact point, whereas a rise, lefty, I guess, just gets there really quickly. So the interesting combinations of that are going to be who can do that while also having great bat speed, right? Rise doesn't swing that long and he doesn't swing that hard. But for example, someone who stood out when I looked at it was Corey Seager, who has a short swing and a fast swing. That seems really valuable, and he's great. Baez and I think Stanton were like the two longest swings. Totally makes sense. So I'm really interested in that. This, David and I wrote about a little bit recently. What does it mean to miss a bat? Not everything has to be from the batter's point of view. I think from the pitcher's point of view, it's cool. Like who can miss a bat by the most? This visual on the right, like the broadcast video, looks like a bad swing, but it's kind of hard. So until you see it on the right, you can't really understand what a disaster of a swing this was. No offense to Trey Turner. I believe he ended this plate appearance with a double. So like good for him. This can tell you a couple of things. Blake Snell was really good at this, and I think that's just because his stuff is nasty, pure nastiness. Some guys, I think it's great sequencing. I believe when I wrote this, it was he was clearly expecting a fastball swing, fastball to swing at, and he didn't get it. So it's a little interesting from the batter's point of view, who's missing by a lot, but I think it's mostly interesting for the pitchers because in our test data last year, it was like Snell and Strider, I think were up there, and the dudes you want to be up there. Oh, yeah, exactly right. So those are cool names on the right, I think. Definitely notice the pitch types are all breaking balls. You're not going to miss with fastballs by a lot. You can also do above and below the bat, which I think is cool. Most of these pitches are below the bat. Fastballs, four-seamers are a little bit above. And I think that's going to be really interesting for analysis, especially as time goes on. Can you show over, 5 years that a guy like Justin Verlander is missing the bat by less and less and less, or improving. I think that's going to be really interesting.
It's kind of hard to visualize like how a hitter's swinging and missing just by watching the broadcast.
Yes.
So this will help you like kind of figure out one, just how much they're really missing the ball by, but also how they're missing it. Like if they're under, over, late, early, you can see all this type of stuff by looking at the swing path.
Exactly. And we did mention swords. We worked with Rob Friedman on this. Not everything has to be like the most hardcore analysis. Sometimes it's fun. Although I do think there's some value to this. Like if you make a pro hitter look that bad, you did something right. Again, like Cease, Strider, Pablo Lopez, like those are cool names. And there's science that goes into it because Rob Friedman was using the eye test. It was a sword when he said it was a sword. But we had a lot of fun kind of going through like, okay, how are we going to define this? Right? Like, what do you do with the bat? This is mostly Clay's definition that came up here. And the results came up being pretty cool. So that's going to be something we'll keep track of in real time, probably, and also in leaderboards as time goes on.
Players are all over Pitching Ninja. They talk about this. So like, I think if we can keep track of it, why wouldn't we?
Now, there's so many questions and answers you can get from this kind of data. I just cherry-picked 3 that are interesting to me. I'm sure there's 100 million more. Everybody wants to talk about Cody Bellinger and his 2-strike approach. Does he shorten up? I would say yes and no. His hard swing rate drops by half. It's also the difference between, 92% not swinging hard and 96% not swinging hard. So TBD on that. The Braves go nuts on the first pitch. Is that because they tell their guys to do that on the first pitch? Or is it because guys like Ronald Acuna do it more than, I don't know, Nicky Lopez did last year? I'm not certain about that. I think the switch hitter thing is kind of cool. Tell Marte, very different. Josh Bell, I think, was like that too. Again, just quick examples of which there are so many more to come. And what we're gonna put up early in the season is not the only thing that will ever be up. We're not gonna have in our first release attack angles, all right, which I know everybody wants to talk about that. Great, I do too. Won't be there at first, but it is in the plan to get there. Some other examples I know Jason's very excited about. Just if we can figure out who's early the most, who's late the most, or which pitchers make guys late the most, all that kind of stuff is very cool. Swing plane matching is all very interesting to me. So that's where we are on that. And everybody wants to know, how do you get it? Where is it? It's not going to be up on opening day just because we're launching with this year's data and I don't want to put up a blank leaderboard. So it shouldn't take that long into April. We're going to have a lot of this up. Just like, let's collect a little bit of data, make sure it looks good. It's going to be meaningful really fast. We're going to have some of it in search available for you to play with, which I know everybody's going to want to do their own research. So much more to come on that. Like our first release will be the first of several, I think. So before I kick it over to these guys, any questions for any of us about any of that? Jamie. You can just yell. There you go.
Yeah, that was great presentation. You talked about the, sorry, let me just move my note here. The relationship between the swing speed and the square up to some statistics, and it's a very strong relationship between slugging and WOBA. So the relationship is very strong. That's there. Do you recall seeing any individual outliers to that, guys who maybe had swung hard, squared up the ball well, but the statistics didn't really line up with that? Any outliers?
I think that's what I asked you to help me look up the other day, right? We're trying to find the guys who had the most blasted balls. And yes, but I don't remember who we came up with. Yes, I think it's going to be really interesting to get kind of beyond the good luck, bad luck, and see who maybe should have gotten more or shouldn't have gotten more. I don't have that handy, but I'm totally with you on that.
Okay, thanks.
You're thinking about Vlad though, right?
Matt Chapman? Yeah, I'm thinking about Matt Chapman.
Oh, Vlad Guerrero too. Yeah.
Okay. Down here.
Okay, so I have a special interest in seam shifted wakes. That's what my question's about. But big fan of having an additional metric other than just spin axis deviation, since that's fairly incomplete. But is your seam shifted wake metric, is that just counting for non-Magnus movement, or does that include seam shifted wake in the Magnus direction as well?
Yeah, for every pitch, we've got like 6 different ways to break down like what the spin is going to be.
Yep.
So it does sort of depend a little bit on which one we choose to put up. The answer is going to be whichever one we pick. But I think the non-Magnus one is what people are most interested in. There's really nothing that's stopping us from putting up more than one. But I think when people think about what is it, it's like a grip metric. It's kind of the way I look at it.
Okay. And then just to follow up to that, what was the process for determining the minimum of 3 inches?
That was just based on you and Tom, Jason, did most of the research, and that's where it looked like it was going to be meaningful, right?
Yeah, so a lot of it's just bucketing based on the overall pitch type and seeing where the distribution was and figuring out what the mean range was, and then kind of determining on that. For sinkers and changeups, they were more aligned on where they met up, so that's where 3 kind of landed on.
Cool, thanks.
We'll just take one more because I want to make sure these guys have time to do their weather bit. All right.
Will the bat tracking stuff also be for the minor league on Statcast, or is it just major league?
Just major league at this time. A lot of this, yeah, exactly. A lot of these parks don't have the extra high speed cameras, so just major league. Thank you for the question. Cool. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, guys.
All right. So my name is Graham. Before we delve hard into the weather, we just want to kind of float one more bat tracking thing that not quite ready for prime time yet, but something we thought was kind of interesting and just kind of get some feedback from the audience about. So we talked about swords earlier, which I think swords are very interesting. They kind of give some insights into a batter's thought process. You know, the batter swung, and then midway through his swing, he kind of realized maybe something's up, and they try to alter course. I kind of think of this as like a corollary to that, where we're trying to figure out a lot of times intent with batters, and we do that, or pitchers too. We do that with various statistics. We're sometimes limited by the data we have. So what I kind of do here a little bit was like, can we figure out when a batter was expecting a different pitch type than he got? So one of the methods I just tried here was start with the batter with a poor outcome, like a swing and miss. We could hold release point constant, but we could substitute the average trajectory of a pitcher's other pitch type. So say, for example, guy swung and missed on a slider. We know an average, what his average fastball looks like. We could keep the release point the same because under the idea that the player can probably pick up the release point accurately, but maybe they can't pick up the spin or the movement quite as well. And then we kind of just draw the two together. So if the pitch path intersects with the path of the sweet spot of the bat, I think we can pretty definitively say at that point that the batter was expecting that other pitch. So kind of what does this look like in practice? Let's see if this plays here. Well, okay. Well, this is what it was. So we have a couple clips here. Oh man, this is not playing. Oh well. Okay, what happened was Grayson Rodriguez threw a great changeup. Mitch Garver swung out way in front, and this is kind of what it looked like in the bat tracking visualization. But instead, if we again subbed in Grayson Rodriguez's average fastball and do the same graphic again, kind of looks like that. So again, I'd say, you know, we don't want to get to the point where we could say definitively like, oh, he would have hit the ball out of the park, or he would have crushed it or something like that. But you could say, I think pretty definitively at this point, like he was probably expecting a fastball on that pitch. And if he got a fastball, he would have done something with it. So again, I don't think this is quite right for prime time yet, but it's something we're just thinking about a little bit. So like, you know, we can do things on the left where you just look at the actual pitch the batter received, and you sub in this theoretical pitch and see what the most common types are. It's probably what you would roughly expect. You know, they're sitting fastball all the time. They get a soft speed pitch. If they had gotten a fastball, though, they would have done some damage. You can do it with pitchers and pitch types, just to kind of see if are certain pitchers really good at fooling batters. And then you can see batters as well. Maybe these, you know, again, these are the list of guys. Maybe these are guys who don't recognize sliders as well as other people. And again, it's kind of like a little bit different than a sword. And the sword, eventually, the batter realized partway through something was up. This case, they didn't do it. But maybe you don't want them to do it. Maybe you're just telling them, hey, swing if it's a fastball all the time. If you can't tell the difference, that's okay. I mean, it's not great, but you at least can still succeed when you do actually get that fastball around. So yeah, that's bat tracking. But now onto the weather. So just kind of a recap of last year, what we did and what we'll expect to see this year. So in 2023, we installed weather sensors high up on each park. You can see on the left there. Kind of in conjunction with CFD models of the park, we can then start to calculate the wind's effect on a given play. So this is a graphic you might see in a lot of broadcasts on the right here. But this is kind of, you know, with these measurements and the models of the stadium, we can now, you know, figure out to certain areas of the field too. You can see there's swirling in left, a little bit different, farther and closer to us in right field, just the wind moving in different ways. And we actually have a large effect on the game, which we'll see more of in a second. So kind of talking a little bit about wind here, we want to start with a little bit about roofs. So the chart here on the right shows you for all our retractable roof ballparks, how many games the roof was closed for the game. And you can see it kind of varies a little bit between the parks. You have what we like to call the hot parks on the left, where the roof is closed mainly because it's too hot and they need the AC running. And then you have the what we'll call the more cool parks on the right, where the roof is more up for like a weather standpoint more of the time. So why are we talking about roofs here? You know, like I said, we mainly talked about roofs just now in terms of heat or in terms of rain, but it also has a big effect on the wind. So what kind of do with this chart here is we have what we're going to call different groupings of ballparks here. So on the vertical axis, we have the wind speed, average wind speed at the park. And then on the horizontal axis, we have the standard deviation of the wind direction. So you can think of that as kind of a measurement for how variable wind is in that park throughout the season. And we kind of put them in groups here. So we have group one, we're going to call the California parks. As you can see, these parks have pretty low standard deviations relative to the rest of the parks. So the wind is very consistent and it's generally pretty strong. I did some Googling, and I think this is mostly due to the westerlies and all these parks being right along the Pacific Ocean for the most part. Then we have another grouping on the bottom we'll call the hot roofs park we mentioned before, where we have not much wind, average speed. Again, most of the time that's because the roof is up a lot. So when the roof is up, there's no wind, as you can see in Tampa, where the roof is always up. And then high standard deviation occasionally in Houston. I think that's more a byproduct of the roof was open so little that, you know, if a wind is very different and it's closed all the time, you're going to have a higher standard deviation. Cold roofs, group 3 there in green. Similarly, more standard deviation wind. Again, the roof's open a little more, so more variability there. And then kind of I'll just call everyone else, where it's just like their wind direction changes a lot, and it's a decently strong wind, which I think is good because it does provide some variability and changes things up a bit. So what does this actually mean in practice a lot? So we can see at the top here, we had San Francisco with the strongest wind speed. And what does it actually mean for play here? So chart on the left is talking about tailwind on pitches. So we have the wind, you know, swirling wind vectors we showed across the entire park. We have that as low as to, I believe it's around 10 feet or so. So you get 6 to 10 feet. So you can actually see the wind's effect on pitches. You know, traditionally we think about the wind's effect on blowing in home runs or blowing out home runs, but they can also have a strong effect on pitches themselves too. So again, focusing on San Francisco here, you can see in red the distribution of tailwind across all pitches, and then San Francisco in orange. And you can see the tailwind is pretty strong in San Francisco. You know, it's 2.5 miles an hour compared to about 0 for everywhere else. The chart on the right is kind of a graph showing the wind direction magnitude for all the parks. 0 straight up is center field. The magnitude is the polar and how far out it goes. And it might be a little confusing. You might be thinking, well, all this wind in San Francisco is blowing out to center field. Pitches come towards home plate. How do you end up with a tailwind there? And we'll get to more of that in a bit. But you can see the tailwind is a large effect, multiple miles an hour here. Reminder that that would have more of an effect on the trajectory of the pitch. The pitch out of the hand will be the same speed regardless of where they are. But if you have a stronger tailwind on a pitch, that means the pitch is going to get to the plate faster than it would elsewhere. So you can think of maybe if fastball speed probably plays up in these places, whereas there's less time for the ball to get to the plate. That also means breaking balls probably would break a little less. Additionally, we talked about tailwind. One of the things through the chart, like I said before here, is, you know, you can see there's no wind, prevailing winds blowing towards home plate, yet kind of every park still has tailwind, which is interesting. We kind of highlight on the right here, the Chicago Cubs in particular are an interesting part because they have a slight headwind bump, which makes up, I think, I don't know how much, Clay, the vast majority of headwind pitches we see. I think Clay will get into more in a little bit about why that is.
Thanks, Graham. Yeah, so one of the interesting takeaways from this data set in 2023 was that all wind means tailwind. And we'll see why I say that here, but that's one thing I think we learned. And then also on this chart on the left here, you know, up and down is how much tailwind boost there is in inches. And I would just say that Seattle is an efficient structure for turning wind into tailwind. It doesn't need a ton of speed to turn it into a pretty decent actual tailwind. And then, yeah, the bigger picture on wind, which we didn't know before last year, is how it interacts with pitches and hits in the field of play. Like, we know the prevailing conditions, but we never understood really the impact on actual pitch trajectories. So like the San Francisco park is really interesting. Wrigley's really interesting. And we've got some other things here. So how does all wind become tailwind? Think about what symmetries there are in baseball parks. There's a huge structure behind home plate, and that symmetry doesn't flop out to outfield. Most of the outfields are much more open. But, you know, there's another symmetry, which is catcher to pitcher, and it's pretty symmetric about that line. But the stands that surround the stadium shield it from the wind, and this is how wind becomes tailwind. So what I've said before is that each stadium is like a full bridge rectifier because it turns what is prevailing tailwind into tailwind, and it turns headwind into tailwind because of this barrier effect here. If you see the curve C here, that starts out as it should be a headwind, at least way above the park. But by the time it gets down to pitch level, it's turned into a tailwind. So that's kind of the typical mechanics of every park turning wind into tailwind. So, here's another like preamble here. But on Savant, we track the apparent drag of pitches using Alan Nathan's formula to see how much fastballs are slowing down by. And we track these for basically every pitch, every year. And we've got variability in this data, as you can tell. It varies year to year, it varies game to game, and it varies park to park. There's also a nice seasonal arc within each of these years. And we're still trying to understand sources of variation. And this is the first year we'll have a complete data set on how wind affects drag. So like I said, there's a lot of variability. And if you want to know what the drag coefficient is of the baseball, you probably need to know which stadium you're measuring it in. So as you can see, the parks at the top here are all like roof parks or retractable roof parks. And the parks at the bottom that exhibit a pretty low apparent drag coefficient have a lot of wind. All right, so that's a clue as to what a mechanism we might see here. So now this is just a scatter plot with these two independent sources of data. Up and down is that mean drag coefficient by the park for 2023. And then now that we have tailwind data, we can calculate the average tailwind for every pitch. And you can kind of see that tailwind has a significant effect on drag. I think that's intuitive. It's just not something we've ever measured before or could. So this is an element to how much variation there is and when we try to assess drag of the Major League Baseball. All right, so I talked about like ballpark symmetry. It is symmetric, along the center line of the park from catcher to pitcher. But there are two parks here that have pretty unusual sideways force characteristics due to wind. You can see Cleveland has a typical speed or wind impact on pitches that pushes pitches towards first base by, a significant amount, I'd say on average about an inch. And then Oakland has a significant bias towards third base. So it helps throw pitches probably, if you're a left-handed pitcher in Oakland or a right-handed pitcher in Cleveland, that's probably something you might want to know. And then San Francisco has a lot of wind, but it doesn't have a significant bias one direction or the other. It's all tailwind. All right, other things we can do now that we have data from all 30 parks and all the plays is calculate how many home runs are prevented by wind. And I think this is a result I wouldn't have guessed, but this is showing that Kansas City had 37 home runs that were prevented by wind, meaning they would have landed over the fence if it wasn't windy. And you can kind of see that there's some significant impacts on the hitters that play most of their games in Kansas City. All right, home runs created by wind impact. Now, another factor here is how many balls get hit in the air near the fence. So that is probably different depending on which team is typically pitching there. But you can see that the Mets ballpark, Citi Field, had the most home runs created by wind impact in 2023. Yeah, and you go down all the way to number 10 here. It's just 4 in Los Angeles, and it's 19 in Citi Field. So it's pretty significant. All right, this is kind of poor luck on which team you play for. Batters average change in hit distance for all balls hit into the air. You can see I picked batters with a lot of balls hit into the air. And there's groups. These groups of batters are based on the park. So the 3 unluckiest hitters are all Royals. And you might guess that MJ Melendez is a left-handed batter if you were to see his the wind chart for Kauffman Field. All right. And then I wanted to show some video to illustrate the impact of wind. So this is the number 1 affected batted ball.
And it's going to be popped up. Shallow left. Oncoming to be in a collision there with Reyes.
Yeah, I think hitting the ball is hard, but it's also pretty hard to field a ball like that. You can see where the outfielder was positioned almost perfectly for this fly ball, but it actually lost almost 90 feet of distance. So that's why they had to run in at the very end. And that's kind of illustrative of the biggest impact we can see on pop flies. Most home runs don't get affected that much because they don't go that high and don't stay in the air that long. but home runs do get affected. Last year, I talked about my favorite topic, which is Ted Williams' 530-foot home run. It's the most spectacular play that's ever been impacted by wind. So I wanted to see which home run in 2023 was pushed the most by wind. Is there any Ted Williams home runs that happened in 2023?
And cover so many innings in last night's game. We're pretty busy overall on this homestand. The top two in the Cubs rotation have been really good. Drew Smiley was outstanding in his last start.
Pounding crushes one. Whoa. Oh, my goodness.
Wow.
JD, I don't know that I've ever seen a ball hit there.
I don't know either. This is my 11th year hit.
Yeah, did you hear the announcer? I don't think I've ever seen a ball hit there. So this is Jared Kelenic. This is the most wind boosted home run in 2023. It gained 50 feet. It's the furthest a ball hit like that has ever gone in the history of Statcast. And it was great because the announcer did indicate that this was an unusual landing spot for that ball. So yeah, wind can impact home runs a ton. It can knock fly balls down. But that's the most spectacular home run, or at least wind impacted trajectory from 2023. All right, so there's one other play I was going to show you where there's a wind impact here. Let's watch the video first.
Most closers don't. He deals a 2-2. Castellanos in the air to right center field. Harris is on the run. Harris up the track. He leads. He makes the catch. Harper might be double. The throw gets away. The throw.
All right, that's the game ender. Probably maybe the most spectacular play of the playoffs, one of them at least. But let's look at this with what would that hit have done if it wasn't windy for that play? All right, you can see one color is the actual trajectory, and the one that's further out is the trajectory that would have happened if there had been calm winds. It would have gone out of the ballpark. Now, Michael Harris Jr. could have caught this. It would have been even more spectacular, but that ball should have landed past the fence. But instead, it turned into a pretty spectacular double play. So that's not a huge impact in terms of magnitude, in terms of feet anyways, but in terms of value and the outcome of the game, it's a huge impact. All right, so yeah, if you can remember anything out of this this hour, pick one of these things you can remember about wind. More wind means more tailwind for pitchers. All right, park to park drag variation is heavily influenced by tailwind. Outlier wind impact parks are San Francisco, Oklahoma, and Oakland and Cleveland. And then wind is unfriendly to hitters in Kansas City, especially if you're left-handed. All right, I think that's it. Any questions about wind before we proceed?
So this makes me think of Bill Veeck and moving the outfield wall. Could you design a ballpark with large doors that you could open and close to manipulate this potentially for home field advantage?
Yeah, so I think there's rumors about that happening in actual Major League history. I'm not going to say too much about it because most of what I know is rumor and innuendo, but definitely there's been studies using CFD techniques on what happens when certain apertures are open within a park, or even here in Arizona, you can see the panels when they're open, that impact. So yeah, that's something that can be designed, but obviously we want to maintain fair and competitive environment. So yeah, we try to keep tabs on that sort of thing. But yes, anybody else? There's a question right up there.
So, being the windy city, how impacted was Chicago by wind? Was that very much that night, or was it actually surprisingly not?
So is this a question about Kerry Wood's game?
No, so Chicago is known as the windy city.
Yeah.
Was that evident in your data?
Yeah, so that's a good one because Chicago, known as the Windy City, did it show up as an outlier in our data set? And it absolutely did. So not only is the climate in Chicago controlled by the proximity to Lake Michigan, but also Chicago Wrigley Field specifically has a very low wind barrier compared to the other parks. So that's why it's the one park that has a pretty significant headwind bump in the winds that impact pitches. But also, they also have a lot of variability in the wind direction and then also magnitude. So that some of the strongest winds we've seen in 2023 happened at Wrigley Field. Yeah, good question. All right, anybody else? We got one right here.
Wait, am I on? Yeah, just real quick, is your rumor about the 87 World Series with Minnesota blowing their air conditioners out and shutting them off when St. Louis was up?
Yeah, I wish we had someone who was more of an authority on that particular conspiracy because it's one of my favorites. I don't have any additional data on that one, but I would like to learn more about it. Thanks. There's one right there.
I was interested in knowing, does this information get taken into account when pitchers are in free agency looking to join new teams and possibly ruin their ERA?
Yeah. So yeah, this is the great thing about this is like the thing about park factor that we've never measured very well before. But yeah, I think you could definitely take this if you're a pitcher in free agency or if you're a player in arbitration. When most of your games happen at one of these parks that have a significant wind impact, like that's real money. So yeah, I think it's something that will be considered more starting now when people have access to this data. So yeah, that's a good question. Another one right there.
So this was mostly dealing with wind. Do the stations also measure precipitation? And has that been taken into any of the?
Yeah, so the stations measure wind and some of the prevailing conditions like humidity, pressure, and the humidity is a big thing that impacts air density. So like this year is the best year we've ever had in terms of understanding air density pitch by pitch. Like we've got temperature before game going back 100 years, but in 2023 we've got really good weather metrics, including humidity and things like that.
Or even like and drizzly rain versus other.
These stations don't measure like the actual condensed precipitation, just humidity more than anything.
Got it.
But we'd like to know more about that so we can know when and when not to cancel games better if they could like improve our predictive weather models. All right, anybody else? There's one right up here and one right here that might be easier to get to first.
Here you go.
So what's one station per park, or some of them have multiple weather stations on them?
There's several different stations like all around the park.
Okay.
There's one that's looking at prevailing conditions above the park. That's like on light towers or scaffolding, and then there's some place throughout the park. But that just helps stitch that model together because we want the input of the model is the prevailing conditions, and then they model what's going on down near the field. So all of those stations can contribute information to the model, and part of it is just validating that model.
Okay, and the second thing I had there is, I was very surprised that your implied drag coefficients did not have Colorado. I mean, it had Colorado basically in the middle of the pack.
Yeah, so that's good because the way that calculation takes into account the altitude and air density. So even though there's a lot of variability park to park, it's all isolated mostly due to wind because we do adjust drag coefficient for air density. So we can adjust for Colorado's. Absolutely. Yeah. Yes. One more up here.
When we look at the expected home run leaderboards on Savants, are those expected home runs considering the wind effects of the different parks, or just the launch characteristics and the how those go into the home runs?
Yeah, maybe we can get Mike or David up here to There's two versions. One does and one does not.
Thank you.
Good question. All right, anybody else? And you can see this on probably your regional sports network, the broadcast of your team's game. If it's interesting, they'll show it. Go ahead.
When you adjust or when you calculate like the apparent drag coefficient, when you control for wind, is there still does the variability across parks disappear or?
Yeah, so I haven't done that yet. But that's something we can take into account is how much each pitch is affected by wind, and this is by this estimate. So I think it'll take a lot of that variability out, but I haven't done it yet.
And were those apparent drag coefficients, is that controlled for other atmosphere like pressure, humidity, or no?
Yeah, so the normal method for calculating that drag coefficient does have this term that takes into account air density, specifically based on pressure, temperature, and relative humidity. So it does a pretty good job of controlling for that as long as we have good inputs for those air density factors. But wind we've never used that to calculate drag coefficient. At least I don't think so. So that may be the next thing we can do. All right, if there's no other questions, then we'll be done. Thank you for your attention. Thank you.